The deep woods are full of mystery, strange creatures, abandoned properties, and bizarre happenings are commonplace. I hope you have your flashlight ready. It's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. Number 1. I was a forest fire lookout in the summers during college. I went weeks between seeing another human sometimes. Some of the first things I witnessed or heard whilst doing the job are just flat unexplained. The one that sticks out in my mind was laying in bed and watching a strange light move through the trees. Figured it was a car headlights until it went vertically up into the air and just hung there for 30 minutes. Just sitting 20 or 30 miles away, parallel with my tower. It was an elevation of 7,000 feet. I watched it until it dipped back below the tree line and never saw it again. At the time I was super creeped out, but chalked it up to another one of the dozen things that I could have seen that I hadn't explained before and no one would believe. But the next day, another lookout called me on the radio, asking if I'd seen the same light. He was much closer but on the other side of it. He said from his perspective, after it dipped below the trees, it landed in an area he knew to be a lake that was only accessible by hiking or horseback. It stood out in my mind because it was the only strange light that summer that we couldn't explain away by either planes, balloons, or tricks of the light from cars. I have since wondered if it were a drone, but this was before they were really obtainable to hobbyists, and have never seen one with lights that could be seen from as bright as 20 miles away, or one that could hover in place for about 30 minutes around then. This is where things get weird. The lake where the lights settled down into, according to the other lookout, is a pretty popular spot for fishing trout. That summer, the lake developed some form of algae, or just something, and all the fish died off. They stocked it with fish, and they just kept on dying. No one remembers this happening before that summer that we saw the light land in it. It was like this for the next 2 or 3 months that I came back as a lookout. No fish could live in it. Just another weird story from my early 20s as a fire lookout. Number 2. When I was a teenager, I used to go out camping by myself. I had a spot that I liked that was across a few fences from my grandparents' house out in the middle of nowhere. One of the places I cut through was a pasture full of cattle. Around cattle, especially cattle unfamiliar to me, I tried to be very careful not to spook them, but otherwise cows are pretty easygoing. This was about a mile from my grandparents' house, and probably about 2 away from my destination. The last time I did this, I slipped through the fence to find the cattle already freaked out. They were insanely agitated about something that I wasn't aware of, so I stayed well clear of them as I went through the pasture. I had a good time camping that night and packed up next morning. As I went back to the pasture, however, there was this ridiculously bad smell. It smelled like a skunk had fought with something in a fertilizer barrel full of shit, and the barrel had broken open. It was awful. I tried to look around for the cows to make sure that there weren't going to be any surprises, to not see them at all. They were just gone. There were some bushes and trees, so I thought that maybe they were just out of sight. I keep walking through the place to go home, and the smell is so bad that I set my stuff down at the little fence line and decide to investigate. Well, I found all the cows. All of them were shot and ripped apart. Somebody had carefully shot them in the head with a bolt gun and eviscerated all of them They had also dug them all into a shallow ravine and piled up the bodies. It was horrible. I hightailed it out of there to get back to my gear, and my stuff was gone. As in, I set it right here on this rock, and it's not within eyeshot. A quick glance showed me that there wasn't anything ripped or fallen out, or something or someone had picked it up when I was 200 yards away for less than 5 minutes. I think Usain Bolt would not have been able to catch me on my way home. I never heard anything else about those cows, but I did not go back camping to that old spot again. Number 3. My cousin is with the Forest Service in Montana/Wyoming, and I decided to go up there with her to literally test the waters. She does hydrology and has to ride out to the middle of nowhere to test streams and snow runoffs to ensure no contaminants. So I thought that sounded fun and wanted to go do a bit of a tour with her. So we were going to have a camp out there for 2 nights. So we packed all our gear into our saddlebags and started out. The first day and night were amazing. Beautiful scenery and amazing air quality. It really is so peaceful out there. I love that area, and I wish I could go up there more often. We started out on the second day, and my cousin said, "Do you want to see something weird?" Of course, I said yes, and she led me to a bit of a side journey into this tiny little ravine. We ended up traveling around 2 hours out of our way from the actual path. At the very end of this fold in the land, she dismounts and tells me to get off my horse. We tie them up in this gorgeous little clearing, and she tells me to follow this tiny wildlife path and bring our little rechargeable radios. It's one of those that you can plug in or wind up. It also acts as a lantern if you really need to, but it kills the batteries very quickly. I do, and out in the middle of nowhere, there is a huge coil of wire sticking out from the ground. The wire itself was not weirdly large, like someone buried a transmission wire, but small, like a 10 to 12 gauge wiring for a house. It trailed off into the bush and trees, so naturally I decided to follow the damn thing out of curiosity. My cousin trails behind me as I do, and this wire, after coming up straight from the ground, is strung across limbs of trees, then back off into the ground, and it snakes around rocks, and finally dead ends into an outlet. The outlet is mounted on the side of a desk. It looks like a school teacher's desk from when I was growing up, with a metal base and a pseudo wood/plastic top thing. No chair, no building, no nothing. Just this outlet and a desk. I'm staring confused as hell. Why is there a desk in the middle of a forest? And then my cousin takes the radio, pulls out the cord and plugs it into the outlet. And then it just lit up and started blaring static. The wire was being fed from somewhere. Now, the place where we were had absolutely no road access, and no buildings for many, many miles, with no other people around, and yet there was a live outlet. Weird as shit. Number 4. I was out for a long run, probably around about 12 miles on dirt roads through Iowa farmland. Plenty of abandoned barns and old buildings alongside it. As I'm running, I see this figure up ahead walking on the road. It's an old man, fairly well groomed. I could have compared him to anyone. He looked a little bit like Jerry Sandusky, but greyer, and with more black in the corners of his mouth than eyes. He was wearing a white sweatsuit and carrying a plastic bag over one shoulder. It looked heavy and full. The man smiled at me, and I smiled back, even though physically I was distancing myself as far away as possible from him. As I passed him, I began to feel dizzy and nauseous. His presence just felt so wrong. His smile was off. I actually had to swallow back vomit that had just begun to climb my throat. My adrenaline had gone up, and my pulse was hammering. When I looked back after a couple of meters from distance, he was gone. I have no way to explain this. Number 5. When I was 14, I lived in a very rural area. As teens often do, I got very bored in my small town, and to alleviate my boredom, my friends and I would routinely explore the surrounding areas and go on long day hikes. There are 2 instances I can remember of being very creeped out on one of our expeditions. The first time was in the summer. My 2 friends and I decided to hike across several dozens of kilometers. We of course prepared adequately, as any group of 14-year-olds would. We had water and a bag of jerky between the 3 of us. Naturally, we got very hungry, as the jerky ran out quickly. To combat this, we decided to cut through the back roads and the farmlands, so that we could get to the highway faster and thusly to food. After about an hour of hungry hiking, we came upon a little village that was all gated up and surrounded by brambles. This itself isn't too creepy. What was creepy was the fact that just inside the gate was a mountain of cattle corpses. There seriously would have at least been 3 dozen bodies in the pile. As kids, we were sufficiently spooked. As an adult, I think a logical reason for Death Mountain may have been that the herd were diseased, and this was an easy way to quarantine. The second time was with the same friends, but we were a few years older. On our adventure, we decided to walk through railroad tracks to gather old rail spikes so that we could sell them to the scrapper. After a few grueling hours of hiking and carrying increasingly heavier backpacks, we happened upon a house. It was very secluded, but from outside it didn't look abandoned. Curiosity and fatigue got the better of us. We dropped our bags and went in exploring. We initially just wanted some water, but we found the front door wide open. Outside, there was a lot of construction machinery, so we thought that perhaps they were doing/finishing some work inside. We called out but received no reply. So with recklessness, we decided to effectively break and enter. This place turned out to be a dump. It looked like a crack house, old garbage and food everywhere. We assumed no one lived there after all. So what do? We decide to snoop around. And we were poking around the ground floor when we heard what sounded like footsteps on the second floor. We called out but no answer was given. My one friend decides to be brave and go up to check it out. As he got to the stairs, he calls out again. Nothing. So he starts up the stairs, and I shit you not, as his foot hit the first step, we heard a music box go off. Alright, kind of creepy. But then we heard a child's giggle from above us. We noped out of there pretty quickly and ran home. We even forgot our backpacks. Number 6. A few years ago, I was driving across the country and stopped at Prairie Creek Redwoods State Park to camp for the night. I got in around 4 p.m. and, eager to experience the redwoods for the first time, started out on a 7-mile trail run through the park. This was early November, so I knew that I had about an hour and a half until sunset, which I thought was plenty of time for the run. If you've been to the Redwoods, you know that the terrain is steep, narrow valleys, and of course, unfathomably giant trees. Twilight came early, and my pace slowed as the light dwindled. Soon as I was walking, just barely able to discern the path, this was the start of a situation. But I knew that I would be warm enough if I kept moving, so I concentrated on staying on the path and absorbing the forest's presence. It was incredibly quiet. I perhaps heard one or two bird calls the whole time, but not spooky. For lack of a better term, I got a sense of peaceful dignity that existed entirely separate from my human-sized concerns. With maybe 2 or 3 miles left in my walk/run back to the campsite, I rounded a bend and came upon a silvery glowing orb right in the middle of the trail. I held my eyes closed. Was this a trick of my night vision into the fading twilight? But the orb was still there when I opened them. After staring at it for some amount of time, I cautiously stuck my hand into it. I didn't feel anything, though I half expected a sensation of heat, or maybe a tingling, but I distinctly remember how the details of my hand appeared in the silvery light. I traced the outline with my hand, but couldn't bring myself to step through it. Eventually I grew cold, and realized I needed to continue. As I was looking for a way around it, I saw the moon just peeking above the ridge. That's when I realized what it was. I had been playing with a moonbeam that disappeared into the depths of the steep valley. The terrain and rising moon had created a sort of illusion that made it look like a glowing orb was floating in the middle of the trail. It was beautiful, yet explainable. I will always hold on to how I felt rounding the bend and seeing that orb. It wasn't fear, just a keen sense of my surroundings with a sudden openness to experiencing something incredibly beautiful, even if it defied my understanding of the world. Number 7. On a 2-week solo backpacking trip, I had 4 days in seclusion between ranger station check-ins. On the first day of the seclusion, I felt like I was being stalked. I lay in my tent that night, and I could hear what sounded like footsteps around my camp, but nothing came close. In the morning, I checked all around and found no evidence of footprints or having any wildlife around me. I broke down camp and took off trying to put it behind me. The second night was the same thing. I grew so paranoid that when I couldn't hike during the day, I would go over rocks and walk through streams, anything to try and break the trail so that I couldn't be tracked. I'd go around a blind turn and then sit there for an hour, waiting to see if anything would come up behind me. At night I couldn't sleep for more than 10 or 15 minutes before waking up. Finally I got to the ranger station check-in and told them what I had been experiencing. I went and set up camp as close to the station as I could, and later the rangers offered me to sleep on their couch for comfort, as I could actually sleep. I accepted and stayed the night indoors. I walked out to my camp in the morning, and it had been destroyed. My tent was cut on the sides, sleeping bag ripped apart and turned inside out. The rangers came to report it, took pictures of everything, and I ended up getting one of the rangers to give me a ride back to base camp, so that I could go home the next day. Not sure what was stalking me, but it scares me shitless to this day. Number 8. I was hiking through the remnants of a remote, long-abandoned town and the surrounding area. To get as far into the woods that I was, you had to cross a fallen tree over a creek 3 separate times. I had just crossed the third bridge and was about 5 miles in and something blue caught my eye just ahead of me. There was a man in his late 60s, wearing blue satin pajamas sitting in a tree. The closer I got to him, the louder he laughed. It wasn't a maniacal laugh, but it set off alarms in my head nonetheless. He also wasn't wearing any shoes, and looked very well groomed/cleaned. I gave him a friendly nod as I passed and he just kept laughing. Then it stopped. I turned and he was gone. No branches cracked, no plants rustled, no sounds were made. He was just gone. Still rubs me the wrong way. The area I was in was pretty rough, very secluded for hiking. Not very many people venture as deep as I did that day, and I still have no idea what was going on there. Number 9. I live in rural Ohio. One of my friends owns a nice barn and farmhouse out in the sticks, where the buses don't run and where there's absolutely no service. He doesn't actually live there. His family owns the house for shits and giggles. They're millionaires. We'd never ran there before, and it's a pretty scenic wood, so we decided that we'd give it a shot. He and I ran cross country, and our team went to state that year, so we were in really good shape. We get to his barn, and plan on running 8 miles near a road and then through the woods. We have GPS watches, so we can make our own path and either turn back at 4 miles, or make a looping path if we desire. About 2 miles off the road, we took a random gravelly road through the woods, and there was a hiking path, so we decided to take it. We live in the country, so it isn't really a big deal. We've done this sort of thing before. I've gotten lost in the woods a few times throughout my high school, but we've never done it here, and we were so far away from home. I didn't run with my glasses and I'm as blind as a bat. I'm making good pace when all of a sudden I smack into my friend. I look up and he's just standing there. I focus in on what he's looking at, and there are bear traps hanging on a branch right in front of us. Looking around, there's more, all blowing in the breeze like wind chimes. Off in the middle, perched up against a tree, there was something resembling a man. My friend pushed me and told me to run. We didn't say a word until we got back to the main road because we ran so fast. Turns out my friend saw what looked like a bloody scarecrow leaning against a tree. Number 10. I grew up in a very rural area of the Deep South, and spent most of my time riding horses alone in national forests and expensive private properties that bordered our house. There was an old abandoned house, 2 miles ride through the woods from me. I often rode by it on my journeys through the woods. Sometimes I tied my horse up, went inside and explored. But there was nothing really of interest. There was just trash, and things that looked like electricity bills from the 80s. I think an old woman used to live there based on some pictures that I found. Time went on, and I went away to college, taking my horse with me. I no longer rode past this abandoned house after graduating my college, and my horse and I moved back home for a little while, and I decided to go back to explore the area again. So I rode my horse the 2 miles through the deep woods to get to this house, which itself is probably 1,000 feet from a lonely gravel road that cuts through the forest. It is very secluded and almost creepy. The house is about 3 miles away from a paved road. I am less brave than I used to be, so when I entered the house I felt out of place and slightly scared. But I used my cell phone light to explore the rooms anyway. A lot was just as I remembered, but right as I was about to leave, I found half a skeletal calf in the corner of the entry room. I have no idea how the calf got shut inside a building. The doors were firmly shut when I approached it, and also the screen door opened one way, so it was impossible for both to be open at once for some creature to accidentally wander in. Furthermore, the nearest cow pastures were a good bit away from the house. I left the abandoned house with the image of my head of some deviant, cruelly trapping a calf in there for sick purposes. I hope I never have to meet the sickos who did that. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I think the moral of the story is, always be careful when out in the deep woods. You never know what you might experience. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to smash that like button and subscribe, as you won't want to miss what I have in store for you next. I've been receiving a lot of great stories from you guys lately, so thank you. Please keep them coming. If you've got a story that you wish to share, feel free to post it to my Reddit or email it to me. Links to both can be found in the description. And don't forget to follow me on Instagram and Twitter, @TheMortisMedia. But anyway, for now guys, I'm going to sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.